McCain Vogel here with this week's Cover Crop Connection. Well, last week we had boots on the ground at the big soil health event in Cedar Falls, Iowa, where agronomist David Kleinschmidt emphasized the importance of considering carbon to nitrogen ratios of cover crops and residues, particularly when making decisions about cover crop termination. Let's dive in a little deeper.
If we start using cover crops, we have to understand that the microbial activity of that cover crop is going, or the soil is going to break down the residues, right? And so we've got to look at, if we've got respiration rates that are really low and we throw a lot of carbon out there, that baby soil can't digest it. It's kind of like having a steak out there. So they can't digest it, they can't use it, and it just goes on the floor. So we need to feed lower carbon to nitrogen ratio plants, or we got to change like when we terminate that cover crop and stuff like that to make sure that those ratios aren't going to tie up the nutrients. Now, when we get a higher CO2 respiration rate, then we can build those cover crops and allow them to mature longer and have a higher carbon to nitrogen ratio because they're going to break it down and mineralize it out and feed it back to the soil, back to the plants quicker. I also use the analogy, it's kind of like building a fire. So when you've got low CO2 respiration rates and you throw on, think of that like building a fire with small kindling, and you throw on a 3-foot log onto that fire, what do? We just smothered it out, right? But if we have a bigger fire that has like some bigger sticks on it, now we can throw on that 3-foot log and it'll burn pretty good. So that's a higher carbon to nitrogen ratio. Now, people will go out and they'll apply nitrogen on that, let's say cereal rye cover crop into corn and say, well, you know, I'm giving that nitrogen to my corn crop. Well, the microbes in that soil were sitting there and they saw all this carbon material, but they didn't have enough nitrogen. So the nitrogen that we apply is kind of like pouring gasoline on a fire on that wood, and you're going to get a huge burst of energy. But what's going to happen is the outside of that wood will just be charred. You're still going to have it all because the microbes were like, hey, we have all this carbon, we just like nitrogen. Now we've got nitrogen, we're going to use it to break down some of this carbon, and it gets locked up in their bodies and not released to the next cash crop.
Really great analogy there to talk about kindling on a fire to explain nutrients and cover crops in relation to termination decisions. Well, that's all for this week's Cover Crop Connection. Until next time, I'm McCain Vogel.